everybody.
Good morning.
Okay, thank you. So before we get started this morning, there's a couple announcements that I want to make. So tonight we'll be having our evening FEBE in this room from 5:30 to 6:30, and it's on family-owned businesses. So just a reminder on that. On your tables, you're probably going to see our different events that we have scheduled for Global Entrepreneurship Week, which starts November 14th. So please review that. If you have questions, Brenna can answer those questions for you. And then the other thing that you have on your tables is a sign-up sheet to be a vendor at the Spring Expo, and we're doing something a little different this year. We're going to do an hour of networking for the businesses, because I know that's feedback that we've gotten in previous years where folks say, boy, I would have really liked to talk to other people, but I didn't have any time. So we're going to allow for networking time among all the businesses. So if this is something you want to do, it's free, no obligation to you. Complete this and give it to Brenna, and then this is yours to keep, so you have the information on it. Okay? So that being said, I'm going to turn things over today. We have Maureen Zappala, and she's going to talk about how to add spice to your speeches. So Maureen, come on up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, is it morning? It is still morning, right? Yeah, 10 o'clock. Okay. All right, quick question. Who in here likes to cook? Hands raise up high. Yeah, I've heard about people like you. I'm not a good cook. I don't like to cook. In fact, last night I made mashed potatoes from scratch for my son, who's 17. And my daughter was upstairs. She's 16. She comes downstairs and she said, "What's that smell?" And I said, "Mashed potatoes." She said, "Well, who made them?" And I said, "I did." And she said, "You cooked?" It's a very odd thing in our family. And the reason I don't like to cook is that I'm not very imaginative. I have no creativity when it comes to assembling and cooking a meal. I can take chicken and I will bake it and broil it. That's it. Kind of boring. Now, if you were to come to my house and I assembled a meal and I made some chicken that was baked or broiled, and I gave it to you and you liked it, you would say, "Oh, that's nice." And I would take the leftovers and I would put them into the refrigerator. But because they were rather forgettable, what would happen to those leftovers in the refrigerator? What?
You throw away.
All of these things. They'd turn into a science experiment, right? They'd be forgotten. And I would pull it out weeks later and not even be able to recognize what it was. But if I took you to my friend Michelle's house, who is a gourmet cook. And she's the type of cook who doesn't even need a recipe. She could just throw things together and it just emerges as something glorious. And you sat down at her table and had her chicken, and it was a delight. And you took those leftovers and put them in the refrigerator. Wouldn't be any leftovers. And if there were leftovers the next day, what would happen? Well, I don't know if at your family, but in our family, it would be a fight to get to them. And the difference between her chicken and my chicken is the spice, the flavor. Because it's the spice that makes something ordinary extraordinary. It's the spice, the flavoring, that makes something not so special become very memorable. Now, I use that analogy because when we give presentations, many of us have either given a presentation that was an awful lot like my chicken, boring and forgettable. Maybe we've given a presentation like that, and maybe you've sat in on a presentation like that. Have you? Maybe you've been to a meeting or a conference or at church or at a community event and you thought to yourself, "Oh my gosh, this is awful." And you walk away from the event and a day later you have no memory of what that person spoke about. We don't want to be people that give presentations that are like boring chicken. And because you're here, you made the right choice, because I'm going to help you to make your chicken presentation into something that's glorious and memorable and delicious and, oh, fabulous and wonderful. Sound like a deal? Now, how many of you make presentations on a regular basis? How many of you converse on a regular basis? Because whether you make a presentation or whether you're just in a regular conversation, these techniques will help you to make your message stick, to make it memorable, to make it exciting, and to turn it into an experience for the person who's listening. So I call it how to add spice to your speaking. 5 letters, 5 components. The 5, this is what I call the 5 must-have, never forget, often omitted, make or break to make you an amazing presenter ingredients that will make your message fabulous. Now, they're not, how's the best to say this? Okay, my style of cooking is I read a recipe and I just look at the ingredient list and don't often look at the instructions. So I just take all the ingredients and throw them all in there. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. This is kind of like that. These are ingredients, and it doesn't matter what order they go in. You're still going to be way further ahead than if you didn't use the ingredients. It doesn't mean that these have to go in this specific order. So let's take a look at what these ingredients are. Before we get into the ingredients, we all remember from any kind of public speaking class we took, or any kind of how to structure a speech class, how to structure a presentation. We all saw this. In ordinary speech, you have an opening, a body, and a close. And typically what you do is you tell your folks what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you told them what you told, then you retell them what you told them. And that's great. Most presentations are like that, and that's fine, but we are not going to give most presentations. We're going to take it up a notch. A good speech looks like this. You've got the opening, and in that body, you're going to tell a story and make a point with that story. And then you're going to have a close. Far too many presentations we hear have that content in the middle to sound an awful lot like this. Blah, 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 blah. Kind of like that Charlie Brown, you know, the parent sound, wah, 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 wah. It's almost like an overdose of information for the audience. But if you couch that information with a story, which has some emotional component, which has some relevance to the audience, the wah, 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 the blah, 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 comes along for a ride, and it sticks with the story. So if you tell a story with your content, that makes you a much better presenter than the original speech, the ordinary speech. But we don't want to just give good presentations. We're going to take it up another notch. We're going to give great presentations. And it looks similar. You've got the opening. You've got a body which has the 5 ingredients, S.P.I.C.E., story being the S, and we're going to get to what the other ingredients are. And then your close. But again, we're going to take it up another notch. We're going to make you amazing presenters. You've got the opening. You've got a body part spice, or body part 1, with the spice ingredients. Then you have what I call body part 2 with another set of spice ingredients. And then you have a third one. And then you've got the close. But this is what makes it amazing, is that you link the close back to the opening. So that's the structure for an amazing presentation, no matter what presentation it is, whether you're making a sales presentation, you're presenting to your stakeholders, you're trying to pitch a new product to some vendors or some funding organization, or you're trying to get your kids to clean out their closets. Structure it like this, tie the beginning to the end, much like going on a roller coaster. I'm a big roller coaster fan, and most roller coasters are like this. You know, you get on the platform in one spot, you go through this crazy wild ride, woohoo, and then you end up at the same place. That's what you do with your presentations. So let's take a look at the S.P.I.C.E ingredients. S is for stories. Now, there's 3 types of stories that I think you should always be saying when you give a presentation. The first story is your story. Now, if you are presenting about your business, most often it really helps if you give your story about maybe your genesis of the business, why you chose this business, how you chose this product, maybe a little bit from your childhood, your little journey. Now, I'm not saying to go into a whole lot of detail, but giving a little bit of your story builds a personal bridge. Because you know, folks, people don't just buy products and services, they buy people. I could tell you a little bit about my story. My background is engineering. I used to work for NASA, right here in Cleveland. I was the director of a jet engine research facility. Quite a shift from being a professional speaker like I am right now. I mean, engineers, we're not known for our verbal skills, are we? In fact, I remember sitting in my office one day at NASA. I had just given a presentation to a room full of the top brass at NASA. And a lot was riding on this presentation, and I really thought, I knocked it out of the park. So I was sitting at my desk, feeling quite relieved and excited, and just feeling great about it. And my boss walked in, best boss in the world. His name was John Schaefer. Loved him. But the look on his face did not match the feeling in my heart. He didn't look pleased, and he looked at me and he says, Maureen, he said, you are a terrible speaker. But he was right. My skills were bad, my confidence was bad, and my effectiveness was especially bad. Well, that was in the mid-1990s when I used to work at NASA. Fast forward to 2009. In August, I'm standing on a stage speaking to 2,000 people, competing, get this, this is so cool, competing for the title of the world champion of public speaking. Yeah, that's what I said. I mean, a lot changed. I mean, I went from being really bad to not so bad. Presentation skills can be learned. People say that, oh, I'm just not a born speaker. Nobody is. Speaking skills are, you're not born a great speaker, you're built into a great speaker. I joined Toastmasters, and that transformed my skills, and from there did a lot more speaking, and now I do professional speaking and training, teaching other people how to become better communicators. I mean, if I went from being awful to not so bad, anybody can. But these are the techniques. Now, I just told you a little story. A little bit of a story to give you a little bit of credibility, a little bit of my background. I wasn't so much promoting what I offer, because I do offer presentation skill training. I wasn't promoting that, but I was just giving you a little bit of who I am. So your story, that's one of the stories you should tell, is your story. The second story you should tell is a customer story. A customer story, or some story related to somebody who is impacted by what you do or what you offer. My friend Terry is a painter, house painter. And like me, he's getting a little older, and going up and down a ladder is getting a little harder for him. So he wanted to change careers, and he wanted to become a speaker to teach other painters how to build their business. So I spent a lot of time coaching him, and it was tough because he's a great presenter. He just needed a little bit of polish. How's that? He was a painter. He's a blue-collar worker. So we worked together, and I spent a lot of time with him, and now he's off giving keynotes at painting conferences. He's speaking for Sherwin-Williams, teaching other painters. So there's a customer story that I can tell you. The third story that you can tell is the story that puts the person you are presenting into their story. I know you just looked at me like, what? Now this is a little trickier of a story. This is where you paint the picture for the person you are speaking so that they can believe that what you offer them will help them. And oftentimes it uses phrases like, imagine. Imagine you're standing in front of a client that previously would have scared the snot out of you, but now you feel confident and strong. Imagine how it's going to feel when that client says, yes, you're hired. It's a story that you tell that puts that person into the story for themselves. So you tell your own story, you tell a customer story, and you tell a prospective customer story. Now, stories are really powerful tools, and let me give you a little tip. I mean, I could do a whole workshop just on storytelling, but let me give you, let's say, 2 tips on stories. Unless there is a shift in emotion in a character in the story, it is not a good enough story. So find the emotional shift, and it doesn't have to be really colossal. It doesn't have to be you climbed Mount Everest. It doesn't have to be you overcame cancer. It doesn't have to be, it can be, it certainly can be, but it doesn't have to be. I tell a story about how I lost my pet turtle and found the turtle. So a story just has to have some type of an emotional shift. The other cool thing about a story to make it more effective is always put it in dialogue. When I tell the story of my boss who told me that I was an awful speaker, I could have said, you know, my boss told me I was an awful presenter. Not a problem, I could say that, but it has so much more impact when I said, John came into my office, looked at me, and he said, Maureen, you are really bad. Conversation and dialogue always brings a story to life. So those are 2 great tips about stories. Find the emotional shift and then put it in dialogue. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? Okay. The second ingredient is P. P for point. A story and a point have to go hand in hand. I could tell you all kinds of stories, but unless it has a point, I'm just wasting my time, wasting your time. So find the point of the story, and the point has to have relevance for what it is you're trying to sell or do or ask your customers or your audience to do. When I was telling the story of making the mashed potatoes last night, the point was to further the idea that, that spice is a good metaphor for adding flavor to a speech. Now, if I was not doing this presentation, if I was doing another presentation, say, I speak on leadership as well and personality styles, that story about the mashed potatoes, it's a cute story, but it has nothing to do with leadership. So don't just tell a story just to have a story. Have a point to the story. Stories and points go hand in hand. Now, the point of the story always is what it is that you want your audience to do, think, or feel. Do, think, or feel. And if you can't identify what you want them to do, think, or feel, if you can't be crystal clear on that, you're going to confuse your audience. I once heard a woman gave a story. It was she was a great presenter. She was funny, she was engaging, her vocal variety was great, she moved well. It was a great story, but by the end of the story, I wasn't sure what she wanted us to do. It was a civic action type story. I couldn't tell if she wanted me to feel patriotic, if she wanted me to write a letter to my congressman to do something, or if she wanted to just change my opinion about the government. I couldn't tell because she wasn't clear. So pick one. What do you want them to do, think, or feel, and make that part of your point. Now, I is actually a double whammy. Illustrations and information. So aside from the story and the point, the illustrations and information would be all the extra, just for lack of a better term, the blah, blah, blah. This is the meat of the content. Now, I am not a scientist, I'm not a psychologist, I haven't studied this in great detail. And I know that there's a lot of controversy in the psychological professional community about right brain, left brain stuff. Regardless of the controversy, regardless of the veracity of the information, I still believe there is definitely emotional content and intellectual content. I know that when I am, I'm a shopper, I like to shop for clothes. I know that when I'm shopping for clothes and I put something on and I look awesome, whew, it's sold. And then I look at the price tag. Well, then my logical side steps in and kind of battles the emotional side. So I like to say that, you know, the emotions make the decision, but the logic writes the check. Therein lies the battle. So when I say that because the illustrations and information will appeal to both sides, the emotional side, or it's different sides, the emotional side and the logical side. The information, that's all logical. That's all the data, the facts, the features, the description, the tangible information. Maybe you've got statistics, maybe you've got scientific evidence. That's all the information. The illustrations bring the color and the texture to that information. Because, again, that's what will carry the information through when the audience member leaves. Now, it's kind of interesting. I don't want to get to that because that's going to take too much time. For example, let me give you an idea, some examples of some illustrations. Okay, let's see if I have them all listed here. Woohoo! Nope, that's the wrong sheet of paper. And I don't have it. Okay. Illustrations would be things like metaphors, analogies. Maybe you're going to use a video clip to demonstrate something. Maybe it's audience participation. Maybe it's a prop. Maybe it's a costume. Maybe it's a chart. Do you have a question?
You said it beautifully. I was typing too slowly. You said the illustrations carry something?
The illustration will carry the information to wherever it is that you need the audience to go, psychologically. Because they can only carry so much information. I mean, you can only retain so much of what you hear. But the illustration will paint a picture in your mind. And that's what you'll remember. We remember things visually much better than we do auditory, even if you're an auditory learner. I don't know how many of you know whether you're visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. I know that I am not auditory. It's like I'll go up and I'll ask you, what's your name? And you'll start talking, and then as soon as you say your name, it's as if the volume goes off. You know, does that happen to anybody else? And then 2 seconds later, I can't remember your name. I'll remember your face because you're very attractive. But the name, gone. I can remember colors and images and motion, but words written on a page, and I love to read. Go figure. So other types of illustrations, metaphors, pictures, songs, something you'll never hear me do. Ain't gonna happen, I ain't gonna sing. Polls, take a poll of everybody. Maybe it's raise your hand, maybe it's a stand up, sit down. I asked you, how many of you cook? And it was just to see, kind of get a visual idea, get a little bit of participation. the types of illustrations that you can use perhaps when you're making presentations to clients and customers. Some of these illustrations are other stories. You could tell more stories. You could provide market data. You could provide industry information. Sometimes the illustrations and information do kind of cross over a little bit. And here's a trick. When you are looking at information, if you're giving information that has a lot of numbers, like 67% of facts are made up on the spot. I just made that up. If you're giving a fact, it's interesting. Some people can't process numbers very well in their head, especially when you give too many. So you have to paint a picture. If I were to say 67% of facts, I would say, okay, if we were to split this room in thirds, this 2/3 of this room, everybody from here on over, every fact that you just came up with has been made up. See, you guys are pretty credible over here. So if you paint a picture, make it concrete. One of my favorite illustration techniques is to use metaphors and analogies and similes. I gave a presentation once. It was a story presentation. It was an inspirational talk. The topic of the talk was about how to bounce back and overcome from life's difficulties, something that we could all relate to that. Now, I grew up in New York City. Let me say that again. I grew up in the heart of New York City. And my dad was one of the designers of the World Trade Center. I mean, from the time I was little, I remember being a part of the construction of the World Trade Center. We lived in Staten Island. Trade Center was in Manhattan, but still we were very much a part of it. And I remember being there for the groundbreaking. I remember being there for the ribbon cutting. I remember my dad's office was a corner office on some very high floor. I mean, I'm older than I look. This was back in the 60s and the 70s. And now my father passed away many years ago, back when I was in high school. But I still saw the Twin Towers as my monument to my dad. And I was giving this speech about overcoming difficulty, and I used the Twin Towers as a metaphor. And I said, this is how I did it in the speech. I said, oh my gosh, growing up in the shadow of the World Trade Center was amazing. Watching them under construction was sheer entertainment. And when they were done, it transformed the New York City skyline. Now, can you see the World Trade Centers here, the towers? Yeah, you kind of can. Even though they're not, I created a metaphor. I actually created a very concrete image. I walked around it. I looked up. I pointed to it. It was very emotional, so you felt it. And then later on in the speech, and what I did is that I planted this area in the middle of the stage where these Twin Towers were, and then I was very cautious to not walk through them. I kind of still walked around them until I got to the point where I said, and when they crumbled, I crumbled. And I pointed. And then I said, what about you? Do you have towers in your life that crumbled? See, the speech that I had was not about the Twin Towers. It wasn't even about my losing my parents. It wasn't even about my loss of the Twin Towers. I was making a bridge, a metaphor from something concrete and personal to me, and now making it about the audience. See, a metaphor often does that. It takes something abstract and makes it concrete, but it also builds a bridge from you, the speaker, to the audience, the listener. Now, that's a heavy topic, the Twin Towers and losing my parents and all that. I lost both my parents in high school, actually. I'll say, so, long story, don't need to go there. But very heavy topic, but I lightened it up. Later on in the speech, I did lighten it up. Believe me, I didn't leave them in an emotional ditch. I did bring them back in there, or back out of it. But a metaphor can help be that bridge from something difficult to something much more refreshing. So think about different ways that you could use metaphors in your world, in your life, in your business, in your presentations. It takes a little creativity, and it may take a little time. Sit down and think it through. Try to figure out, just take an ordinary object. The cup of coffee in that picture. Cup of coffee. Life, getting going in the day is a lot like I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head. Cup of coffee, it's got something that just gives you a jolt of energy. Just like my product gives you a jolt of energy. I don't know, that was kind of a stretch. But you know what I'm saying, you know what I'm doing. Just find ways to bring metaphors and analogies into your presentation. It adds that extra color and texture. All right, so we had stories, we had point, we had information and illustrations. C is the call to action. When I first started speaking a lot, this was something that I routinely omitted from my presentations. And it wasn't because I chose to. I didn't know that I shouldn't put it in there. A call to action is simply the next clear step for the audience to take. It's what you want the audience to do with the information that you are giving them. Sometimes it's crystal clear to you. You want them to sign a contract. You want them to make a purchase. You want them to join your organization. You want them to employ you, engage you, contract you. You want them to do something. And you've given them all this information. You've given them a great story, and you've made a solid point, and you've got awesome illustrations and information. And now you've laid the groundwork, the next logical thing, actually the thing that your audience is waiting for is, now what? Now what do I do? Give them the next step. Give them the call to action. The reason I so often I omitted it, was pretty simple, actually. I didn't want to sound, what?
Salesy.
What was that?
Like you're selling.
I didn't want to sound salesy. I didn't want to sound pushy. I didn't want to sound preachy. I didn't want to sound parenty, like you should. Why don't you? But it's all in the wording. And it's all in the groundwork that you've laid up to that point. Because if I were to tell you, I promise if you get this, you're going to be like this. I promise if you get this, this will make this change in your life. I promise these benefits and features are great things, but I don't tell you where to get it or how to do it, you're cheating the audience. A lot of times when I've done this workshop, and this actually is a full-day workshop that I can make it into, so I go into a lot more detail. And in S.P.I.E., in the information part, I go into a lot of detail about I go into a lot of detail about how to build metaphors, how to use mnemonic devices like rhyming and rhythm and all kinds of things. And one of the calls to action I give people is, go get a rhyming dictionary. Anybody have a rhyming dictionary? Anybody never heard of a rhyming dictionary? I know. When I heard about a rhyming dictionary, I was like, woohoo, angels are singing. Of course, I'm a writer and a speaker, so this is a great. Rhyming dictionary is exactly what it sounds like. It's a tool that helps you to rhyme words. If I were to say, give me words that rhyme with cream, what would you say? Dream? Scream? Team? Beam? Seam? Team? Dream? Scream? We run out of answers pretty quickly. Those are all great answers, and you'd find them in the first maybe inch of the. You look up the word scream, or you look up the word EAM, because it goes by syllable, and it would go on for 4 columns of words. I know, that's what I said. Because it's 1-syllable words, 2-syllable words, 3-syllable words, phrases. It's like a writer's dream. Okay, so why am I telling you this? Because I would give this workshop and then not tell people to go get the rhyming dictionary. It wasn't until many people came up to me afterwards, how do I get one of those rhyming dictionaries? And then I was like, ooh, light bulb. Tell them where to get the rhyming. Tell them they can go get the rhyming dictionary. So here's my call to action for you. Question.
Where do you get the rhyming dictionary?
I got mine on Amazon.com. My favorite one is a Merriam-Webster rhyming dictionary. They come in different. There's also a website called rhymer.com if you don't want to buy a book. But the book is way better. It's easier to use. Okay, so here's my call to action, even though I'm not complete yet. Story point, information, illustration, and a call to action. My call to action to you is, let's go to stories for a second. I want you to think through stories from your history, from your life, from your world. And start to catalog them. Start to jot down maybe phrases, index them. And I'm not saying be real super sophisticated. But if I were to say to you, tell me a story from your childhood, many of you would be like, deer in the headlight. I don't know, which one do I take? There's so many. But if I said, tell me a story of a first day at school. Can you come up with a story pretty quickly? Whatever grade, I don't care. So here's my call to action. Go through your life and catalog different stories. You may never use them in your presentations, or you might. I keep a story file on my computer. It's just a Word document that I sat down one day and I went through my history. I went through, stories that I heard about my babyhood from different family members. Jotted down a word or a phrase. Stories I remember from first grade. Stories I remember from elementary school. Stories I remember from high school, college, after college, different jobs that I had, different places that I lived, different men I dated, different vacations I took, different whatever. Just go through and just categorize them because it helps it to be a lot easier when you want to find a story. That's how I remembered the stupid story about the turtle being lost, because I cataloged things like that. So that's my call to action for you, is to go catalog your stories. Now, a good call to action is going to be specific, and it's going to be doable to the audience that you're speaking to. I gave a presentation, a similar presentation. It was more about interview skills, how to present yourself professionally in an interview. And I gave this talk to a networking group for people in between jobs. It was a perfectly legitimate topic to that group. One of the calls to action that I had was to join Toastmasters. I'm passionate about Toastmasters. But Toastmasters, it's not expensive. Maybe $100, $150 a year. But if you're out of work, $150, they'd rather put food on the table. So the call to action was completely inappropriate for that group. What do you think a better call to action would have been about how to improve your presentation skills to a group of out-of-work people? What do you think I could have said instead? What's that? Get together with somebody. Find somebody you can bounce your ideas off of. Maybe do some research on the internet. Go to the library. See if you can find a class, a free class. Sign up for my newsletter. That'll help. My newsletter is free. If you want my newsletter, give me your business card. I'll put you on my list. I send out presentation topics, a little quick email every 2 weeks. Comes straight to your inbox. If you don't like it, opt out. I won't be insulted. Not a problem. So the call to action needs to be doable and appropriate for the audience that you have in front of you. It also needs to be something that you know works. I know I could talk about getting a rhyming dictionary because it works. So the call to action has to be within their realm of capability and something that you know that it works. Okay, finally, E, and I'm going to wrap up with it. Oh, never say to an audience you're going to wrap up, because that means they are checked out. But this is the final ingredient. It's called the evaluation, but it's not the evaluation that you might be thinking. It's not where you are evaluating the audience is evaluating the presenter. And I will say that because I do teach presentation skills, sometimes I'm my own worst enemy when I'm listening to another speaker. My pastor, a conference speaker, a sales presentation. I'm sitting there thinking, my pastor even knows, when he's up there preaching and he sees me coming down afterwards, he knows, oh my gosh, she's going to tell me something. The evaluation is this. The most important thing, the most important part of any presentation that you make is not your opening. It's not the body, it's not the clothes, it's not the interaction, the jokes, the humor. The most important part of any presentation is actually what's going on right now. And it's not the pause. What are you doing right now as I pause? But what's going on in your, who said that? Yes, thinking. Bingo, give that man a prize. Give that man some applause. The most important part of any presentation is the thought process that goes on in the audience's mind. It's not how great you are up on stage. It's not the great, well, the semi-great PowerPoint presentation that he has. None of that. It's the audience's thought process. And as a presenter, it's your responsibility to control that. Because you want to take them on the journey that you want them to go on. You don't want them to be off on a rabbit trail. And there's two really good ways to do that. Because as they are thinking, they are evaluating in their mind, how can I use this information? Is this valid? Is it relevant? Is it helpful? Can I do it? So that evaluation is going on in their head. And there's two ways that you can control that. And the first way is to pause. Because when I'm not talking, you are thinking. The second way to control that evaluative process is to ask questions that have the word you in it. Have you ever? Can you imagine? Don't you agree? And then, of course, after you ask the question, you go back to the first part, which is pause. Let them, in their own mind, think. Now, because I grew up in the heart of New York City, where everything we do is fast-paced, everything is quick, slowing down in my speaking, that is so hard. And then forcing a pause where there's silence, and you all are looking at me, that's hard. But it's not about me, it's about what you are thinking in your head. So if you're a presenter and you're presenting, get used to the pause. Ask the question, give them the chance to think about it, and get comfortable with the silence. Because as awkward as it is, it's the best gift that you can give your audience. Because chances are you're not looking at me thinking, why isn't she talking? You're looking at me thinking, thank God she stopped talking so that I can think. So that's how you control that evaluation process in their head. So you've got the stories, you've got the point, you've got the information and illustrations, you've got that call to action that has them running out of the room doing what you want them to do. And then sprinkled through the talk, you've got this control of the evaluative process. Can you see how these ingredients can really elevate your presentations? Yeah. No more boiled and broiled and baked chicken. Now you've got that gourmet meal with that flavor that will make it memorable. What other questions do you have for me? Right here, sir.
I noticed your evaluation maybe had about a dozen slides on the people are reading the slide rather than listening to you.
True.
You find that to be?
Oh, absolutely. I loathe PowerPoint. I do, because, I don't know, maybe it's the ego thing. I want you looking at me and listening to me, not looking at my slides. But that's exactly it. People are torn, and it is a stress point for an audience. They're thinking, do I look at that or do I look at her? I'm torn. Does she want me to read? Does she want me to listen? Am I allowed to even write? I mean, there's such a stress factor going on there. So I try to make it just images, a single word, no flying things, unless I would have put a video up there and I would step back and shut up. Because then I'm deferring to what's on the screen. So you are absolutely right. Have you seen that? You go and you see PowerPoint presentations that are just, thousands of words, even print that's too small. Don't do that. Be better. Question?
Yeah, for the call to action.
Pause that.
For your call to action part, in regards to wording and not sounding very salesy, what are some examples you could give us?
A lot of it goes to the questions, the evaluative question. Don't you agree that this information is useful? Or you can just simply, I asked it in the context of this presentation, does that make sense? Is this helpful? And then you could proceed into, wouldn't you like to eliminate the stress of trying to rhyme the word cream? My solution to you is to go get a rhyming dictionary. So put them in the problem, and then, the problem is like sticking them with a knife, and then you turn the knife to increase the pain, and now the call to action gives them the solution to the problem. But it's in the wording. You can't just start out and say, you got to go get a rhyming dictionary. You just got to sell it a little bit more. Sir.
So kind of a follow-up on the earlier question, putting the content on the PowerPoint. What about giving a handout that mirrors what's on the screen?
Yeah, that's fine. And I didn't bring a handout because sometimes I didn't know. Actually, I forgot to ask you, Becky, if handouts are a normal part. I can't remember if they were or not. I always opt to not do it. However, in places that do ask for a handout, I never put on the handout what's on my screen. Because this is a useless handout. What's on my screen right now is a useless handout. Sometimes I'll do a handout that's got a fill in the blank, but sometimes people feel offended by that because it makes them feel like they're in grade school. If there's really information that they want, people will come to me and say, can I have that? I'll be happy to give you more information. I've got the text of this presentation in a document. I could send that to you. But handouts, I don't know. I'm just not a big handout fan. If it's a lot of detail, a lot of numbers, a lot of stats, maybe you need to have that as a handout. But I typically don't mirror what's on my presentation. Back here, ma'am.
Hi. So when I would do, I'm sorry, I don't know. Is this on or I'm just loud in general?
It's on. You're good.
Okay. Instead of handouts, I would give out cheat sheets at the end, which is obviously you have evaluation, ... So it has like a cheat sheet of what I talked about. So there's that, and you can pick it up on your way out, and it's a cheat sheet of my entire presentation. In addition, the call to action, you can have a word like, here's how you can help. That can be your lead-in, and then it's like, here's a GoFundMe page, or send your letters here, or whatever, but an easy way to have a call to action. Here's what you can do, and then it's not like a sales thing. It's like, here's a list of stuff you can
Exactly. There is no possible way you can give all your information, all of your brilliance, all of your knowledge in any presentation. And so you want to give them the chance to have more of you. In fact, good segue. I think my next slide. There we go. You want more information about what I can offer? There's my call to action. Go to my website. Commercial is over. Anybody else had a question? Did I have another question? Really good. Time for one more question. Okay, quick, let me have a question for you. Give me maybe 2 people, what was a big aha moment for you from this?
Telling your story. I don't ever tell the story of why I started this company or my background and what took me to here. So I need to start putting that out there.
Awesome. One more, over here.
I like how you ended up tying into making it concrete.
Okay, good,
Walking around it, like,
good. Then my work here is done. I mean, this was awesome. Thank you for letting me come, appreciate it.